So I went ahead and started the broadcast there.
Okay.
I stopped my video.
Yeah, I don't have mine running. Okay, it's 1:59. Are you starting it right at 2?
Actually, I think people can already hear us.
Say that again?
Yeah, we'll start right at 2.
Oh, there's 7 people already. Wow. Okay, good. Excellent.
So some people are still trying to get in here. So we're going to wait just a minute here and go ahead and get this started. We'll just 1 minute in, we'll get this started. Jose, you're welcome to start your video if you want people to see you.
Not presentable.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, or I guess potentially good morning for some of you, and welcome to our webinar on CupixWorks. Our main topic today will focus on how you can drastically reduce job site visits during pre-design and planning for tenant improvement and remodeling projects. I know all of you are very busy and have a lot of options for content, so many thanks for tuning into this webinar. As for our agenda, we're planning to present about 40 minutes and try to leave about 10 minutes or so for some questions. Please feel free to send your questions into the Zoom Q&A chat box. Depending upon time, we'll do our best to answer these at the end of the webinar. My name is Paul Collard. I'm the VP of Customer Engagement at Cupix, and I'll be your host. I'm presenting today from my dining room in Palo Alto, which is definitely a sign of the times in this age of social distancing. I'll apologize ahead of time if you start to hear a little music that sounds like My Little Pony. I let my daughters know I'm putting on an important webinar, but you never know what happens. I've been with Cupix for a couple of years now and primarily focused on integrating CupixWorks within workflows for the built world lifecycle. My background is in technology and software in the AEC industry. Our guest today is Jose Cotto, who is the president and CAS of CS Architects in Mountain View, which is located here in Silicon Valley. Their office is actually a stone throws from Google's headquarters. But I have a feeling, Jose, you are calling from home.
I am, and I'm calling from my bedroom.
So, well, you don't have your video on, so if you don't have pants on, that's okay. So, Jose, I was hoping you could start and maybe talk a little bit about CAS Architects and your company.
So we're a firm of about 25, and we are located in Mountain View, as Paul noted, which is kind of the midpoint between San Jose and San Francisco in the North Bay. And it is right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And we are a firm that specializes in catering to advanced technology companies. So we do work with Google, we work with other companies similar to Google, but also companies in the life sciences, biotech companies, pharmaceutical drug research and development, everything under the sun for microelectronics, data centers. So anything that involves intellectual property of development of services or products, devices, we have some hand in that. And we are just an architectural firm, and we've been around since 1978. And we really just work out of the Bay Area. We don't have multiple offices. It's a single location. And I've known Paul for a very long time.
So, actually, that was something I was going to say, that we have known each other a very long time. It's actually a really long time. I actually started working at CAS when I was a senior in college. They used to squirrel me away in the back corner at their only CAD station and having me learn this newfangled AutoCAD. I think it was release 10 running on DOS. But it was kind of crazy.
1988.
No, not that early. We don't need to get into dates here, Jose. So, it is kind of crazy that you got this 21-year-old kid in school for engineering without any experience in architecture to figure out how to implement CAD into your workflow. I think it turned out okay, but you might have a different opinion on that subject. But anyway.
It ended up being a great career for you.
Anyway, it gives you kind of an idea of how long we've known each other. And we actually are still in touch since those really fun days we had so long ago when we were young. But many thanks, Jose, for joining. Maybe expect some beer to be dropped off this weekend at your house. Now, I know most of you tuned in to hear from Jose, but I wanted to take a few minutes to talk just a little bit about Cupix. So Cupix was founded in 2015, and we currently have 35 people across offices in San Francisco Bay Area, Dallas, and Korea, and we're still growing. We have a great dynamic of people, including your hardcore R&D engineers with extensive experience in 3D, industry experts in architecture, engineering, construction. The founding team of Cupix are pioneers in this 3D space. They developed a program called RapidForm, which later rebranded GeoMagic, and it became the world's best-selling point cloud processing software. And it also manipulated free-form geometric objects. And it was primarily used in aerospace engineering and manufacturing applications. But it actually did get used in AEC. Frank Gehry was actually using RapidForm in the day on some of his crazy design projects. But after selling the company to 3D Systems, who's one of the largest manufacturers of 3D printers in the world, the same team started Team Platform, which was the first cloud-based collaboration software for engineers. And of course, 3D Systems gobbled them up a couple years after, and now they're on Cupix. A little bit of a disclaimer, I was not part of the Cupix founding team. I didn't work for RapidForm. I didn't work on the Team Platform team. Simon, our CEO, who's also our CTO, happens to live in a neighboring city to me. And we got in touch a while ago while I was researching some technologies for AEC and see how it could be used. So we got together on many occasions. It's actually a lot of occasions. And after finally asking him over and over and over to join the team, he finally relented. But quite honestly, working at Cupix it's just been a great experience for me to work with some really, really smart people. And Jose would probably say much smarter than me. So, but I'm okay with that. And again, before we get into this a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about CupixWorks. I have a little video there running. I'm not going to be able to get into much details because we really want to hear from Jose. But CupixWorks is a 3D digital platform that enables AEC professionals or even service providers to create and share 3D visual sites that people can explore virtually without actually visiting the site. This makes your job sites more accessible and actionable for all stakeholders, regardless of their technical skill or the environment they're in, which today, could be the office, it could be the job trailer, could be in your car and your mobile device, or your home, which has really become the new normal now. What makes this all happen is how CupixWorks ingests 360 panoramic images or video from consumer-grade 360 cameras and figures out how they all exist to each other in physical space, and it automatically pins them to plans and BIM models. So I make it sound easy, but there is a lot of technology and development that went into this effort, and that's really one of the core strengths of the team that I was just talking about. So we're just releasing CupixWorks in an early adopter phase, and it does represent a big upgrade and really solidifies our commitment to solutions and workflows within this AEC industry. Again, we don't have time to go through everything. Again, people want to hear from Jose, but definitely keep a lookout in the near future for more features to take advantage of this spatial intelligence and really extend CupixWorks into more AEC workflows. Let's go to this next slide here. So really our topic today is about de-densifying the job site or the project site. And this de-densifying is a term I first heard from Shane Flanagan at Dome Construction, and we really kind of latched onto it. This whole concept is especially important in our current environment. We're really changing the way how we collaborate and work together. I think the entire AEC industry is really trying to figure out how to keep their projects on track. And hopefully what Jose and I go through can show you how CupixWorks can potentially help with that. So this is a diagram that I have from, that we pleasurized from Autodesk BIM 360. And what it does is it talks about the construction life cycle, how you start with design, you go through pre-construction, you go through field operations, and then handover and operations. Excuse me. What isn't illustrated in this diagram is there actually should be an arrow going from handover operations back to design, because it's always changing. Buildings are constantly being updated, changed, expanded. So notice the certain terms in there are highlighted, and those are the workflows that we feel Cupix can really enable and benefit by using our system. So right now you're actually catching the second half of a two-part series to introduce CupixWorks to the AEC industry. My colleagues, Scott Anderson and Vinay Murthy, along with our guest Shane Flanagan, who I was just talking about earlier with Dome, they had a great session last Wednesday on how Dome is using CupixWorks during the two middle cards there for pre-construction and field operations. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to get a recording of that session. But what we're here to talk about is the design side. And note how I put like a little parentheses under design, and I added remodel in there. And our discussion is really focusing not on new construction, we're focused on remodels and tenant improvement projects. So these projects might not be as exciting as, let's say, the new Oakland Raiders Stadium in Vegas or a newly designed Frank Gehry Museum. But the reality is half of this country's 5.6 million commercial buildings, so offices, hospitality, education, healthcare, manufacturing, distribution, were all constructed before 1980. We have a lot of old buildings. So what you'll find is of all the money getting into commercial construction projects, the majority of this goes to remodels and TIs. So it is very applicable. Applicable how Cupix can really save. And the next slide, again, I'm trying to get through these very quickly. I just wanted to talk, just highlight the teams that are involved in this design phase. And I've broken them down between design, city, construction, and the owner or the tenant. And we're gonna touch on a lot of these as we're talking. I know we're talking with Jose, who's on the design side as the architect. But CupixWorks really can touch everybody in there. And Jose is going to talk a lot about how he's using CupixWorks and make sure it touches all those people on that design, everybody involved in that design team for that project. So what I would like to do is talk about a case study. It's for 800 Corporate that CAS had worked on. And kind of what I was hoping to do is have Jose talk about the project, the size, the scope, and everything else. And while he does that, I'm just going to kind of, as you're talking, Jose, I'm just going to kind of go through the project a little bit.
Yep.
So people get an idea of the size and everything else associated to that.
Sure.
Hopefully my internet behaves. So
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Background. This is a little bit of background on this project. It's located in Fremont, California. It's a 150,000 square foot single story structure. And it was going to go through a conversion process from largely a warehouse structure to a new biotech drug manufacturing facility. And so it was important for us to have the building captured using Cupix so that we can verify the validity of various drawings that we received from the client through their real estate brokers and other entities to determine how accurate were our CAD files, how accurate were the as-built drawings, the prints that were handed to us. And this project is located at about 20 minutes from our office. And typically on a project like this, we would be making a certain number of visits throughout design. But this tool allows us to minimize the amount of time we get on the freeway to get to the site. We still are going to do an initial site visit, and it's usually a core number of people that would do that visit, but the rest of the extended team would actually be able to leverage Cupix and avoid having to go to the site repeatedly as they start going through design. And so as you can see what Paul's doing here, it captures a 360-degree photo virtual reality model. And this allows us to be able to fill the gaps. A lot of projects, this building, for instance, was built in the late 80s and went through several remodels throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. And the documentation is kind of ad hoc, not very consistent. Some projects were well documented, others were not as well documented, were done kind of down and dirty. Some documents were lost. We had floor plans, but we didn't have reflective ceiling plans. We didn't have any sections. And this model really starts to fill the gap in so that we can actually, well after the initial site visit, leverage this tool to go through the project as we're starting with programming and preliminary design and start to check existing conditions. Invariably with our projects, the client determines just how much of the building gets remodeled. It's usually not a 100% redo on the interiors. And so we then identify the spaces that we're going to be making modifications. We're able to use the model to take measurements for information that's missing so that we can go back in and construct sections. In this case, this is the lobby. And these tools will allow us to then be able to work on our Revit model. We use Revit at CAS to then fill in the gaps that are not available via documents. But it also allows us to, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was, one thing I wanted to bring up at the beginning here is that I did want to mention kind of what Cupix is not good for. And, you had mentioned you have kind of existing documentation and Cupix really wants that, and we can adhere to that existing documentation. If you have a building that you don't have any as-built of this type of scale, Cupix is not the right solution for you. So you're going to want to default to you want to default to either laser scanning, mobile LiDAR scanning, or the old-fashioned way with a laser measure and tape measure. So that's kind of what I want to mention there, Jose.
Okay. And this allows us, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just wanted to make note that, we are able to get measurements out of here. So there's no point cloud, there's no mesh or anything that we're measuring off of. We're actually measuring within the images. And this goes to some of the tech that we have on the back end in terms of how we triangulate location of data. And the way this works is that, one, the floor is configured. So the easiest thing is to just do a very simple dimension on the floor. and go over to there. And notice I didn't care about the making it orthogonal because we're always going to present you with an XYZ offset associated to that. And that works great in the sense when you're working with things on the floor. But if you're doing things in 3D space, we use a method where you actually pick a common point from within two images. And it basically triangulates how that exists within physical space. And so here I'm going to figure out the height, let's say, of the soffit. Notice how I pick one point, and it's asking me to pick the second point to be able to determine where that exists in space. And now here, if I just want to know the height, I'm just going to pick anywhere on the floor. And notice how it's giving me the XYZ offset associated to that. So that's how we facilitate dimensions within the system. So sorry to interrupt you there, Jose.
It's okay, not a problem. So Paul's correct. This is what we use to fill in the gaps on our Revit model. And I think, Paul, we are aware that this is a 1% accurate in terms of the dimensions you get. So if I'm looking at a 30-foot dimension, it's going to be within 1% of what the actual dimension is, which for our purposes, if it's existing spaces and we're not tearing it down and building new, is good enough for what we do. But the other thing that's wonderful about this is because it's not a point cloud where you're just using an abstract model, it's based on three-dimensional imagery. You can look at the quality of the finishes, because a lot of times the project is about building new spaces within the existing building, but it's also finding out what needs to get refreshed simply because it's dilapidated in nature. And so you don't have to worry about quantifying that on your first visit or a couple of visits. You can take your time after this has been captured to assess the entire building. And this tool becomes ever so more valuable the bigger the building is, because if you have to think about the resources that are required to take 2 to 3 people out to a site. There's another project that we worked on that we did Cupix that's about twice the size of this building, 300,000 square feet. You could imagine having to walk 300,000 square feet on multiple visits physically, the time-consuming effort to do that on a building of that scale, whereas this model allows us to just simply jump from one part of a building to another based on our interest at that given point on the information we need to get at. You go to the site physically, you actually have to come through lobby, go through the security, sometimes get escorted. And if you're somewhere deep in the bowels of the building, that easily could be another 15 to 20 minutes just to get to that point after you've gotten to the site. So this is where savings start to be realized in terms of the usefulness of this tool and how it can, through the entire design phase, be constantly referenced. And Paul's showing there the way you can tag elements in that image throughout the model. You can tag fire extinguishers, you can tag electric panel boards, horns, strobes, so that when you go to the model and the tags are created, you can look at the floor plan view and see where all of these items are located. So extremely helpful in getting an understanding about the existing conditions that you're going to be going in and altering to some extent.
And I'll navigate to a bathroom, which I know is always fun for everybody.
Yeah.
And those are discussions I have with architects, is they just love not having to get to the bathrooms. So I think all architects hate getting in here and trying to get information. So this becomes very useful.
So, and I will make one point. It's clearly advantageous to do it in a building that's unoccupied. You do have to do some logistics in buildings that are occupied to arrange a time for whoever you're using to perform the scanning of using Cupix to be able to have the access to every room. And that's a key point. They have to be able to access every room. You can't just roll the dice and have them come out there and hope to get access to everything and find out from security that you're running into issues. So if the building's unoccupied, not a problem, very easy to do. A little more logistics upfront required. It's just simply planning and making sure that the tenant and the landlord understand that you need access to that whole building. And Paul and I have talked about this. Some of those scans were done off hours so that there wouldn't be employees around, and that worked probably best for us to do that. But things like restrooms that Paul just mentioned, we capture the men's and the women's. You're never having to worry about knocking on the door and asking if there's anybody in there. Once this is captured, you're good to go. And so one of the things, anybody that's attending this webinar that does a lot of remodels, you know that one of the first things you always have to do is figure out from an accessibility standpoint with compliance, with the Justice Department's ADA, but also the way the state implements accessibility. What are the upgrades that are required to make this building accessible? The older the building, the more likelihood you're going to find some non-compliant conditions. The visual conditions that you can look at here is going to help you greatly to be able to find out what's accessible and what isn't.
So, and I apologize if I missed this, but I know you're updating all your ceiling elements from this, and a lot of it is visual.
Correct.
You know, it's a 2x4 grid, it's a 2x2 grid, fire supply, returns. You know, even depending upon how detailed you get into that BIM model, you can get detailed to determine, you know, is this a full height wall, or does this wall go to the underside of the ceiling? So you're able to determine that these are both full height walls. You would be able to determine does it go to the underside of the ceiling. So there's a lot here that's going to enable you to get those BIM models accurate and up to date.
Correct. So the views that Paul is showing there, you do have, if you're using a mouse and you have a wheel on your mouse, you're able to zoom in and out of any image, to zoom up to a door frame, zoom up to the corner of the wall, as Paul mentioned. But a lot of times, a good example of this would be, you can see fire sprinkler heads, existing sprinkler heads. We 90% of the time never get our hands on sprinkler drawings. They're usually done by the contractor, not by an engineering firm. Just a side note for CAS, so you guys understand, in Silicon Valley, over 90% of all of our remodel projects are done on a design build basis. That's the situation where you're doing design build. CAS is not bringing on board engineering consultants. You are working together at the same time with a general contractor who brings on mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design build contractors. And that's the type of work that we do mostly in Silicon Valley. It's what the clients prefer because of the delivery model in terms of schedule and cost control. But elements like sprinklers that aren't on documents, you can clearly find out if you're going to take a space and upgrade the lighting. You can then confirm where all the sprinkler heads are to make sure that you don't create unnecessary conflicts. This is the warehouse portion that's getting converted into a drug manufacturing facility. And this allows us to look at the structure, confirm that the framing on the roof is accurate. We asked Paul, because this is a high bay space, to take scans at 2 levels, one down at the normal level, and what the software refers to as bird's eye. You can see that the camera is actually mounted at a much higher level. And in this case, it's a warehouse, but there are projects where we use the bird's eye because it's even more important, because it's not a warehouse. It may be an existing manufacturing space that has an incredible amount of distribution of utilities and services, and you're going to go in and perform a remodel. And if it's an older building, you are not going to be handed some kind of a BIM model that has everything 3-dimensionally accounted for. You usually get 2-dimensional AutoCAD files. That's typically what's being delivered. It's going to be a long time before we're in a world where a BIM model is the norm, and you're doing remodels and you have that that luxury of having the model already established where everything is at. But this bird's eye setting allows us in very congested spaces to be able to see exactly where the conduits are, ducts. Again, this is a warehouse, so it's pretty wide open, but we've done projects where this tool becomes extremely helpful. And if you're doing design build projects, this gets shared by everybody on the team because they're all on board at the same time, the contractors and the architects in a design build setting. The contractors are able to leverage this, limit the amount of time they have to go out to the site, and start to see what the utilities are. I mean, this is kind of nice here. You're able to see, it is kind of, scary what the conditions could be, but these are rows of offices that were put in the warehouse as well as the restroom. And you can actually, without having to get a ladder now, be able to go back and see how the framing is done, to make sure that if you're going to modify it, that you're going to have, you would know what you would have to do to meet code for the framing. But you could also see if there are any other utilities that are running above it without having to get a ladder or go into the rooms and pop the T-bar ceilings up. And so, on these slides, you can see that the amount of information allows you to do a visual coordination with everybody involved in the team. We usually ask Paul to capture the entire site because it allows us to go back and check everything that's out on that level, including the conditions of the elevations on the building in terms of disconnects and other devices that are mounted on the side of the building that don't show up on drawings that you would typically go out to the site to have to note. You can just use this model to capture those things. If you're cutting in a new opening, it allows you to, in real time, as you're moving through the virtual reality model, to see if you were going to cut a new opening to the building, how you would create the egress path from the building out to the public right away to meet all of your code requirements. Here are some.
I apologize about the internet. It isn't always behaving for me. So
this is accessible parking that's there, so you can see the condition on the striping and painting to determine whether you need to upgrade that. But you could also check it against the California Building Code to make sure that it does have the latest requirements for the colors, the striping, the symbols, the signage, the verbiage on the signage. You can see the curb cuts there, so where the path is at. Truncated domes, when you're looking at existing sites, you need to find out whether they have all the truncated domes that they need. So the things that you would normally spend a week at the beginning of the project going out to the site on multiple visits to capture all of this data. And again, the larger the site, the more work is involved. And our projects tend to be pretty large scale for tech companies. They don't do work in 5,000 square foot buildings. They tend to do work in anywhere from 100 to 300,000 square foot buildings. And they have multi-purposes for what they use those buildings for. So this tool starts to just give you endless amount of returns in terms of save time. Usually we take the back of the building and there's some requirement to convert loading docks into equipment farm enclosures to support the process on the inside. Again, checking all of the paths around the building. So very useful to just move around the site and be able to use this.
I thought there was a door there, so I guess not.
And you notice Paul's able to jump from one location to the site to another location on the site just by using the plan on the right, and just be able to pick where each scan point was taken. It's represented by those circles. And so just imagine you're walking the site this large. There's just time to get from one point to another. The roof, all of these type of projects that we do for remodels, there is already the equipment that's on the roof. When you determine whether their service years are kind of reaching the end, in a lot of these buildings, it's common to find HVAC units that are anywhere from 10 to 15 years old and they're reaching the end of their life. You usually have to replace them. This saves time by not having to go up on the roof and have to document it as a separate exercise. It's included as part of the model. You can see how the equipment is screened in order to meet planning department requirements. And if you're adding a new piece of equipment and you're trying to find an ideal location where you can set it on sleepers and not worry about disrupting current conduits or paths of travel to get around for maintenance, you can save a lot of time using this model and taking a look at all of the conditions. But again, this is an example where not just the architect, but the structural engineer is looking at it to get an idea how the previous sleepers were done. If we're going to touch an existing unit and replace it with a new unit to determine whether we can use some of the framing that's there. You're looking at the skylights. You can look at the condition of the parapet and the roof screen, but the mechanical and the plumbing contractors are also going to be using this to see the conditions of the units. They're still going to run their tests to see how the units run, but you can get a pretty good visual on the condition of the unit based on this kind of a scan. And it is the kind of thing, if you tell Cupix what you want, they could take a shot, for instance, that's shown on this slide, but they can also open the doors that lead into the components inside and take a shot of that, so that you have the ability to do that. This is an example of some of the mechanical rooms that contain some of the other guts for a building that's doing research and development or manufacturing. And so these are the kind of typical equipment you come across when you're dealing with tech companies and their facilities. And so you'll not only have the roof being utilized for this, but you'll also have interior spaces that are utilized.
So an example, you get into these technical spaces, more data, the better here. You want to be able to see more. And this is also where other technologies just wouldn't be able to work. So I'm going behind equipment here. Notice how, we don't care how you hold that camera. It can be to the side, can be up top. As long as there's a line of sight, we can connect those. So you can get into these kind of crazy views where you could never imagine having a 360 image that's navigable and everything else. Yeah. So again, helping those design consultant engineers. So.
And Paul and I talked about, there was a shot there you saw of a control panel. electrical panels and control panels, they usually have a schedule on the inside of the door that tells you the circuits and how it's configured. And so Paul and I had this conversation about having the scan also include opening every electric panel and reading the schedule that's on the inside of the door that maintenance uses, but zooming up to it and be able to actually read that schedule. So just imagine the electrical design build contractor or engineer now saves a lot of time by being able to look at that.
Yeah,
so
and that's
Paul
also
actually,
a new feature that we have with our software, which we didn't really get into, was our new capture app. And if we have time, we'll get into that a little bit later. But we have the ability to, while you're in the field, again, sometimes, we're working with, consumer grade 360 cameras, maybe can't read that very well. I can read some of it, but the ability to, while you're capturing, be able to, use your iPhone with that picture and actually tag it while you're doing that capture in the field. And now you have that, kind of geolocated in your building so that you have this high res image of that available for everybody.
Great tool. Great tool. You can't imagine how many contractors would be thanking you for taking the time before they came on board to get this all done and make it available to them when they start working with us.
So kind of again, that was a very brief overview. And I wanted to talk a little bit about just kind of the benefits here. And I am going to rely on Jose to talk about these because really it's him communicating the benefits to him and his entire team.
Yeah, so the first bullet item that you see on this slide that talks about the benefits was one of the first things we realized immediately. I'll give you an example. We're located in Mountain View, and we did a project for an electronics company that develops storage devices, and they were located in South San Jose, which was approximately 45, 50-minute drive on Highway 101. And the building was 300,000 square feet. And in the old days, before we had something like CupixWorks available, if you've got a 300,000 square foot building and you are remodeling 150,000 square feet of that, 50% of that building is going to get altered, gutted, and redone because they are coming out with a new product line, for example, for their storage devices. Those locations in the buildings could be anywhere within that 300,000 square feet. So just imagine all of you that have gone through this process, the number of times you'd have to go out through the site for visits during design to capture things as you start to discover about more about what the scope is in terms of what it involves. And as the extent of alterations gets further defined, you realize multiple times in the previous method that you had to go back out there because there were rooms that you didn't pay as much attention to that you found out later on are going to actually get modified. And so an example like that, you could imagine during schematic design, you could visit the site on any given phase as many times as 10 to 15 times. Well, this model allows you to reduce it to 1 or 2 times. So if I've got 2 people, because they both need to hold a tape measure and do the things they got to do, or one's at one part of the building, the other one is at another part of the building to save time. Imagine the number of times, if it's 10 to 15 visits during a single design phase, you are driving out there 40 minutes each way. If the building is 300,000 square feet, and in most of these buildings, they are secured, it means you have to check in, get cleared through the lobby, and then get escorted to these areas because they are secured areas. You are talking about 3 to 4 hours every time you visit. 3 to 4 hours, half the workday is automatically lost every time you go to visit the site. This product allows you to cut it down to 1 or 2 visits for the things that you absolutely have to capture that the 1% measurement accuracy cannot be acceptable for. Some ADA dimensions, for instance, you have to find out within an 1/8-inch tolerance whether you're compliant or not. Those are the only things you really have to capture in the first 2 days, or the 1 or 2 days that you're out there. And so you're not just saving the time to drive out there, you're saving the time to walk through the building, to crawl through something, to climb up something. All of that is eliminated. So there's that benefit. When we start doing design, owner, architect, contractor meetings, OAC meetings, this model is automatically loaded at the start of every design meeting because it now becomes a point of discussion every time somebody raises an issue. Do we know what we're going to do for all of the electrical rooms, whether we are going to be able to keep the switch gear? And while that person is making those comments, you are switching over to the model and everybody just latches onto the visual, and it just makes the chances for miscommunicating on something much less likely. You're able to make decisions faster because you don't have that comment that comes up in a lot of OAC meetings. I'll confirm that for you. Let me go back out there after this meeting and find out whether we have the number of switch gears that we thought we had. We also use this model when, for projects like this, where it involves a lot of technical issues, including the use of hazardous materials that are used during the process of fabrication for products. We usually have during schematic design or early in design development a preliminary meeting with the city, with the fire department, with the planning department, and the building department. And we do an introduction. And in the old days, you would bring preliminary drawings, you'd roll them out on the table. You may have a few photos. Well, that's all gone by the wayside. We basically use this tool. We bring our laptop, we hook it up to their conference room display, and we actually go and walk them through it. Now what's probably going to happen because of social distancing here in the Bay Area is that we're going to invite the city officials to a Zoom meeting, for example, and load this model, walk it through, introduce the project to them. And while you're introducing the project to them for preliminary feedback, you are walking them through a VR model. The first time we did this, which was 2 years ago, with a building official and a fire marshal, they were absolutely blown away because they were not trying to imagine what you were doing. They could see exactly what you were proposing to do. And so if they had questions about existing conditions that we were touching, those questions, they already knew what the answers were because they were looking at this model. So very, very helpful. Another point I wanted to make is that we discovered early on, and I was giving this to feedback to Paul after the scan had been done. Hey, Paul, this building is 300,000 square feet. Facilities, the facilities group for this company that manages the campus, and this is like a 15-building campus in South San Jose. They started to realize, I can start using the other balance of the 150,000 square feet that they are not touching to automatically use it right away for facilities maintenance. So if someone calls one of the facilities plumbers because a user complained that there's a leak above one of the T-bar ceilings and water's coming through, they're able to find out exactly which unit of either a water heater or distribution piping is serving that room by going through this model and not have to walk out to the site to do that assessment. They can do it here because they're all located in the facilities building, which might be 15 minutes away from the building that they need to go to because it's a massive campus. So right off the bat, all kinds of benefits were being realized when we started implementing this with all of the members of the design team, as well as people that are not involved in design, but are using the facility on a day-to-day basis.
So some statistics here on the capture. It's a lot of area. Main floor, the roof, the entire site, the warehouse. This constituted 14 hours on site, over 2 hours. It's a lot of panoramic images, a lot of detail, but you can take a lot of panoramics really, really fast. And that's what's done. So it was what we would call an expert capture. You know, your average user isn't going to want to go out there and try to capture this much space. We didn't talk about capture. I don't know if we'll have time to do that, but we have ways to capture in very flexible options so that people can go out there and capture on their own. And that is something that we're introducing to CAS, and that, you know, and actually the next slide is talk a little bit about CAS and how they approach these, but they're including it on their proposals of any sort of significant size. And I think with the self-capture, or what we call the DIY capture, there's going to be scenarios where they don't need much detail, that they're going to be able to just go and do that on their own. So,
right.
And sorry, and Jose, maybe you could talk a little bit about your procedure on proposals and things like that.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, after we did the initial projects with Paul, we realized that we didn't have to, there was a cost model that we first started using like 3 years ago with some of the other technologies where I'll say, for example, a 300,000 square foot building would take about 3 to 4 days to capture and would cost about $40,000. This is pre-Cupix, using some of the other models. Navis was one of the vendors that we used for a project that we had very large in the Bay Area. And when Paul came along, it was a different type of technology. It didn't involve point cloud, and we didn't need the use of point cloud, but it kind of came along with Navis. But with Cupix, since it was just a photo capture, we did a similar project, almost the same size, and it came out to about, I'm trying to remember, Paul, something like $15,000 in 2 days to capture, because it didn't involve a large trolley. piece of equipment that someone had a wheel around. It was just a person with a construction hat with the camera mounted on the hat, walking around with an iPhone and capturing the space as they walked through. And the cost was 1/3 of what we had originally purchased. So when we started using this technology for virtual reality models of photographic conditions, we had to go to the client and get an initial buy-off on using this, because you just don't just assume that the client's going to accept that you're going to spend $45,000, $50,000 in reimbursable costs to capture this. So we had to get approval. And we were getting about a 50% hit rate with clients as we would ask this. As we moved over to Cupix and we started seeing that the costs were anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4 of the cost that we were originally doing, for these larger projects, we were thinking, okay, this is just part of our reimbursables. If I'm submitting a fee of about $300,000 to $500,000 to do the design on this project, and I've got reimbursable costs of about $50,000 to $60,000, and $10,000 of that is the Cupix photo capture, for example, I don't even bring it up in terms of getting approval. I just simply notify the client, this is one of the services we're incorporating. It's invaluable. We're going to use it, just giving you the heads up. But at that point, they're no longer considering, hey, you should run it by me first, because that's a lot of money. And it saved us a lot of time in getting that approval.
And the advantage of sharing it with everybody.
Absolutely. And so you've got a lot of skepticism because no one's actually experienced it firsthand. But once they do, I have yet to have a client look at me and say, this was a waste of money. I'm not sure what I got out of this.
Well,
now,
and I think most people haven't experienced it on that such of a large scale. They might have seen it.
Again, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, and I wanted to do just you know, unfortunately, this project that you had got canceled. So you never got to the point where you actually were going to build this up into BIM. Oh, no. Sorry, I didn't.
There were two other projects that Paul and I were thinking of showing. I could not get the client to approve either of them because they were confidential in nature. They did not allow us to share them, so we ended up using a project that got canceled that I didn't have to worry about.
So just very quickly, because we're really kind of beyond our limit here. This was a project. It was they were redesigning this lobby. They wanted this all in very detailed BIM. All they had were facilities drawings. And so I actually helped with this because it was kind of an experiment of getting this into BIM. Is it practical to use this to design your BIM? Hired someone on Upwork. They did it all for about 24 hours of work. Got this all into a BIM model, which I can show you quickly. And the time on site to capture this was like 40 minutes. But it's not just the first floor. We modeled the first floor, the second floor, and even skylights. And we did this all just from taking dimensions from the 3D tour. And you can see the resulting model that was came out of Revit, which is just brought into the system. And actually, I can also show you the bird's eye view. So they modeled this entire area up here from photography and taking measurements. So not sure, Jose, you would have gone to this type of detail, but this project, because it was a test, it kind of went a little out of control in terms of people asking for details, but we were happy to oblige because we knew we were going to.
No, we do. It is not inconceivable to have a client who's asking you to do a remodel, not necessarily of a technical manufacturing space, but the lobby or an executive briefing center. At that point, the architectural scrutiny of remodeling an existing space is at a higher level. So it does happen. So it would be invaluable to have this tool.
Yeah. And, you know, and I actually have those details here. And then I do have a technology comparison, and we don't have a lot of time. We're going to have to cut this short, but you know, you're still, I mentioned earlier, there's cases where Cupix just really is not a good solution. So there's going to be cases like, you know, I think CAS is a company. They would consider Leica laser scanning, which I know you have done projects with that type of terrestrial laser scanning. And you've also done mobile LiDAR scanning. And I know early on you had used HoloBuilder, but I think you're able to see really quickly the kind of the differences in terms of what we're able to do for you in terms of really helping you with your BIM models and everything else. So. Now I had other slides here, but I'm going to have to call it quits here. And really there's, two calls to action here is to, if anybody's interested in being involved in doing your own captures, feel free to reach out and we'll reach out to you. And if you need help with a capture, let us know. We have service providers around the country that we can call upon and do something similar in terms of how CAS Architects outsources this type of service. Anything
Paul,
else
there is
to
a couple of
add
questions.
there, Jose?
No, that captures it. And I just did want to note there are a couple of questions that people put in the chat window that you might want to take a look at. If you want, I can read the question.
I did answer the question, how long it took, to capture that site.
Right.
So it was about 14 hours on site, not including travel to get to the site over a couple days. I had mentioned using the iPhone and tagging. Again, that's part of the site capture. And the process really is as you're capturing, the assumption is that you have what we call a project template, something I didn't get into, but your project is pre-set up. We use a concept very similar to, or we take cues from Revit in terms of how we set up projects, in which you configure levels, you have elevations, you have reference plans. Think of the reference plan similar to a viewport in Revit. And you use that as a template when you go on site with our capture app to capture that data so that when it goes up to the cloud, everything's already pre-located. But you can also use that reference plan to tag those photographs on the plan also, so that you're automatically tagging with your iPhone photos. So it's another feature that we've added kind of with this CupixWorks. I apologize we're not getting to all these questions. Feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to answer any other questions and go into further detail. And lastly, just a big thanks to Jose. So you were really kind of the star of the show, and
it was my pleasure.
That experience, I won't say how many years, but that experience in architecture. We don't need to go into the number of years. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And we're going to make this recording available to you all. So feel free to reach out. And if you want a copy of that, and share it amongst your colleagues. Thank you. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend.